It was December 4th, 1872, when the crew of the British brig Dei Gratia spotted a ship drifting aimlessly through the restless waves of the Atlantic Ocean. The vessel's sails were torn and hanging loose, her motion sluggish, as though no hand guided her. The name painted across the stern read Mary Celeste. At first glance, she appeared intact, no signs of struggle, no smoke, no distress flags flying. Yet, as the Dei Gratia drew closer, the eerie truth began to unfold. The ship was not merely abandoned, it was lifeless, adrift in an unsettling silence that defied reason. Inside, the dining table was neatly set. Plates, utensils, and a half-eaten meal waited for a crew that would never return. The ship's cargo of denatured alcohol remained untouched. Personal belongings were found in place clothes, pipes, even a sewing machine mid-stitch, as if its owner had simply stepped away for a moment. But the lifeboat was gone. The ship's papers were missing, and so was every living soul aboard. Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and 7 crewmen had vanished into the Atlantic without a trace. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no damage from a storm, no evidence of piracy or mutiny. Only the faint whisper of the sea and the rhythmic creaking of wood filled the air. Some say the discovery felt like stepping into a graveyard that had forgotten its dead. When Captain David Morehouse and his men of the Dei Gratia boarded, a chill ran through them, not from the cold wind, but from something else. The uncanny feeling that eyes were still watching, that life lingered in the air, invisible but close. They could not have known that this quiet, drifting vessel would become one of the greatest maritime mysteries in history, a ghost ship, whose legend would echo through generations. Theories would multiply, investigations would fail, and truth would dissolve like mist over the water. But that day, all they knew was that the Mary Celeste had been found, eerily intact yet utterly abandoned. And as they sailed her back toward Gibraltar, a question began to haunt the minds of all who heard her story. What could make an entire crew vanish from a seaworthy ship in the middle of a calm Atlantic morning? To understand the enigma of the Mary Celeste, we must first go back before her discovery, before the silence that swallowed her, to the days when she was a vessel full of life, ambition, and hope. She had not always been called the Mary Celeste. Built in 1860 at Spencer's Island, Nova Scotia, she was christened the Amazon, a proud merchant brig built for the rugged transatlantic trade. Her wooden hull was strong and broad, crafted from seasoned oak, and her sails once caught the Atlantic winds like wings of promise. Yet, even in her earliest days, misfortune seemed to follow her like a shadow. During her maiden voyage, her first captain fell ill and died suddenly. Soon after, she collided with another vessel in the English Channel, suffering heavy damage. Superstitious sailors began to whisper that the ship was cursed, that something about her keel was marked by bad fate. But she was repaired, sold, and eventually renamed the Mary Celeste. It was as if changing her name might cleanse her spirit, allowing her a second chance at destiny. Her new owners refitted her for long voyages and chose a man of integrity and faith to command her, Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs. Briggs was an experienced sailor, a man known for his discipline and calm demeanor. He brought with him his wife, Sarah, and their young daughter Sophia, believing the voyage would be safe and prosperous. On November 7, 1872, the Mary Celeste departed from New York Harbor bound for Genoa, Italy, carrying 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol. The sea that morning was calm. The horizon stretched wide and golden, and the world felt steady. The crew of 7 were all carefully chosen, reliable men, seasoned by years of sailing. There was laughter as the ship slipped past Staten Island and out into the Atlantic swell. No one could have imagined that this would be their final sunrise together. Somewhere between New York and the Azores, their laughter vanished, their footsteps faded, and the Mary Celeste was left to wander alone. No storm was recorded, no distress signal sent. It was as though the ocean itself had taken them quietly, deliberately, leaving only the ghost of their journey behind. December 4th, 1872, the North Atlantic stretched endlessly in every direction, its rolling swells shifting from silver to steel under a pale winter sun. The Canadian brigantine Dei Gratia, commanded by Captain David Morehouse, was midway through her voyage to Genoa when her helmsman spotted something unusual on the horizon, a ship drifting oddly. Her sails loose, her path unsteady, as though caught between worlds. Morehouse watched closely. The vessel's rigging swung aimlessly, and her course made no sense. "She's sailing herself," one sailor murmured. There was no answering signal, no sign of crew on deck. The ship moved with a strange, broken rhythm, like a sleepwalker adrift on the tide. Caution crept into Morehouse's mind. He ordered a closer approach, and soon, through his spyglass, he could read the faint name painted across the stern: Mary Celeste. A cold silence followed. The Mary Celeste had left New York only weeks before, bound for the same destination. Her crew should have been alive, working, responding. Instead, she drifted in eerie quiet. Morehouse ordered his first mate, Oliver Devoe, to take to men and board the vessel. The small boat cut through the swells, its oars slapping softly against the water. As Devoe climbed up the side of the Mary Celeste, the wind seemed to die. The deck was empty, no movement, no voices, not even a gull. The ropes hung slack, the sails torn and ragged. The main hatch was sealed, but the fore and lazarette hatches were open. The lifeboat, once tied across the deck, was gone. Inside, the air smelled faintly of damp wood and alcohol fumes. Water sloshed about 3 feet deep in the hold, not enough to sink her, but enough to whisper that something had gone wrong. In the captain's cabin, Devoe found personal belongings neatly arranged: a sewing machine, clothes, a child's toys, a sheathed sword under the bed. The ship's logbook ended 10 days earlier, its last entry placing the Mary Celeste near the Azores, hundreds of miles from here. There was food in the galley, water in the barrels, cargo untouched. Everything was ready for life except life itself. No blood, no struggle, no clue. It was as if the crew had stepped away for a moment and never returned. Devoe's heart thudded as he whispered to his men, "She's deserted." But the word didn't fit. This wasn't abandonment. It was disappearance. Captain Morehouse stood on the deck of the Dei Gratia, staring at the lifeless silhouette of the Mary Celeste swaying in the Atlantic mist. He knew what the law said: salvage rights belonged to those who brought a derelict ship safely into port, but this was no ordinary find. There was something unsettling about claiming a ship that seemed haunted by the very absence of its crew. Still, duty called, and greed whispered softly in the background. Morehouse made his decision. He split his already small crew in half, sending Devoe, John Wright, and 2 seamen aboard the Mary Celeste to sail her to Gibraltar, while he remained with the Dei Gratia. The sea was restless that week. The weather turned cold, and fog wrapped around both ships like a living thing. Devoe later wrote that every creak of the wood, every whisper of the rigging sounded like voices, soft, distant, and wrong. The Mary Celeste drifted heavily, undermanned and unstable, her sails refusing to obey, her compass slightly off-center, as though confused about its own direction. Some nights, Devoe swore he heard footsteps above him, slow and deliberate, but when he climbed to the deck, only the wind answered. It took them more than a week to reach Gibraltar. The day Gratia arrived first, her crew exhausted but safe. The next morning, through the fog, the ghost ship appeared at last, silent, pale, moving slowly into the harbor like a drifting memory. The authorities were baffled. A ship found perfectly seaworthy, provisions intact, cargo untouched, and yet completely abandoned it, defied every rule of seamanship and common sense. The Vice Admiralty Court seized the Mary Celeste immediately, and a formal salvage hearing was ordered. Captain Morehouse expected reward, but instead he met suspicion. The Attorney General of Gibraltar, Frederick Soliflad, a man known for arrogance and pride, became convinced that something darker was hidden beneath the surface. He believed the De Gratia crew had something to do with it, that perhaps murder or fraud had been committed at sea. He ordered the ship examined from bow to stern, looking for any sign of foul play. What they found only deepened the mystery. Strange marks on the hull, cuts that looked deliberate, and stains on the deck rail that some claimed were blood. But no one could prove anything. The Atlantic had already swallowed the truth, leaving only ghosts to testify. In Gibraltar, the great stone halls of the Vice Admiralty Court echoed with murmurs of suspicion as the case of the Mary Celeste unfolded. Soliflad stood at the center of it all, pacing, his voice cutting through the air with sharp precision. He was convinced, at least, that foul play had occurred. Perhaps murder, perhaps mutiny, perhaps something even stranger. He questioned Captain Morehouse for hours, his tone always one step away from accusation. How could the De Gratia, a smaller and slower ship, have found the Mary Celeste adrift without some prior knowledge? Was it chance or design? Morehouse maintained his composure, describing in calm detail the moment they spotted the drifting vessel, the decision to board, and the eerie emptiness they found there. Yet Soliflad was not satisfied. He had the ship searched from keel to deckhouse, and the findings were whispered like ghost stories through the harbor. A sword found beneath the captain's bed with what looked like a faint brown stain. Deep scratches near the rail as if from some violent scuffle. Barrels in the hold, 9 of them, found empty, their contents evaporated into the air. He seized upon every fragment as proof of human wickedness. But when the alleged blood was tested, it turned out to be rust. The cuts on the rail came from natural wear. The missing barrels were normal leakage. Still, Soliflad's pride would not release the theory of murder. He even entertained the notion that Briggs and Morehouse had conspired together, one to fake disappearance, the other to claim reward. Yet when he looked into the eyes of the men who had risked their lives towing the ghost ship across stormy waters, doubt flickered. The reward was finally granted, though small, less than 1/5 of the ship's valuers, if the court still distrusted the hands that had brought it in. And so, the Mary Celeste sat in Gibraltar harbor, stripped of her sails, her deck empty beneath the relentless sun, a prize no one truly wanted. The case was closed, but not resolved. No explanation satisfied logic. The ship was sound, the cargo mostly intact, the crew simply gone. Soliflad's papers closed with one chilling line that summed up the entire affair. A mystery inexplicable by human reason. The phrase clung to the ship like fog, marking her forever as the ghost of the Atlantic. As the months passed after the Gibraltar hearings, The story of the Mary Celeste began to drift far beyond the port's grey stone walls. Newspapers seized it, twisting fact and rumour together until no one could tell where truth ended and invention began. Everywhere, people asked the same question: what happened to the captain, his wife, his child, and the crew? Some whispered of mutiny. Others spoke of madness at sea. The first theory that gained traction was one of foul play. Solly Flood's lingering suspicion fed it the idea that Captain Morehouse and his men of the day, Gratia, had murdered Briggs and his crew, set them adrift, and then claimed the ship for salvage. It sounded logical, even cinematic. But there was one flaw that day. Gratia had left New York 8 days after the Mary Celeste, and it was a slower ship. No matter the course or weather, it could never have caught up before the ghost ship reached Gibraltar. Others accused Briggs himself. Perhaps, they said, he plotted the whole thing, faking disappearance for insurance money, hiding somewhere in the New World with his wife and child. But the insurers never filed a claim, and Briggs, a man of faith and discipline, had no motive. His ship wasn't heavily insured, and his reputation had been spotless. Then came stranger whispers: pirates off the Moroccan coast, known for their brutality. Yet the evidence didn't fit. Nothing had been taken. Valuable personal items were still there: jewelry, clothing, instruments. No looting, no struggle. So what did happen? A few went further still, imagining darker motives, that Captain Briggs, under religious mania, might have turned on his own people, slaughtered them in some fevered vision before taking his own life. That theory collapsed when the man who proposed it, historian Joan Hilbert Lockhart, spoke to Briggs's descendants and publicly apologized for defaming a good man's name. And yet, the truth remained unseen. Even as logic stripped away the lies, the void only grew deeper. How could a vessel so sound, with a crew so capable, simply empty itself of human life without a trace? The Mary Celeste became more than a ship. It became a riddle carved into the waves, a question whispered by the sea itself. Whatever had happened aboard her, it left no witness, only silence. And that was the most terrifying clue of all. In the years following the discovery, sailors began to speak of the Mary Celeste in hushed tones, as though even her name carried a curse. The Atlantic, they said, had swallowed her story for a reason. Each wave that slapped against the hull of another ship seemed to whisper her name, a ghost of the sea that refused to rest. Some captains refused to utter it aloud when passing through the same waters between the Azores and Gibraltar, believing the ship's spirit still drifted there, searching for the souls it had lost. What frightened them most wasn't the idea of pirates or storms, but that no struggle had taken place, no broken masts, no blood, no sign of panic. It was as if the people aboard had stepped calmly into the air and vanished. The logs left behind by Captain Briggs spoke of nothing unusual, no warnings of danger. The final entry, mundane and measured, gave no hint of fear. So if terror had come, it came in silence, swift and unseen. Some scholars in later years proposed that perhaps the ship's cargo held the answer. 900 barrels of industrial alcohol, volatile and temperamental, sloshed in her hold. What if one of them had leaked, filling the air below decks with invisible fumes? A spark, a lantern, a pipe could have turned the vessel into a floating bomb. Perhaps Briggs, fearing explosion, ordered everyone to the lifeboat temporarily until the air cleared. Perhaps the rope connecting the small boat to the Mary Celeste snapped, and the crew was left adrift, watching helplessly as their ship sailed away without them. It was a theory that fits logical, tragic, and cruelly simple. But like all explanations, it could never be proven. The barrels themselves told no tale. Most were intact when found, and even if true, it only deepened the unease, for it meant that the sea had not claimed them through violence, but through quiet miscalculation, an accident born of trust in calm waters. The Atlantic was vast and pitiless. A single gust, a single wave, could erase all trace of a lifeboat. So perhaps the Mary Celeste's ghost was not one of malice, but of despair, an empty ship wandering the ocean, forever seeking the crew it lost to a moment's fragile hope, after the inquiries faded and the whispers dulled. The Mary Celeste was returned to her owners and quietly refitted. The ship that had once been the Atlantic's most infamous riddle was now simply a tool for trade once more, though few sailors wanted anything to do with her. Men said she carried bad luck, that her timbers remembered screams. Her new captain, George Blatchford, tried to calm the fear, but his own voyage was plagued by strange misfortune, crew desertions, damaged rigging, and accidents that seemed to follow the ship wherever she went. The Mary Celeste had become more than a vessel. She was a living omen. Mariners who crossed her path swore the air around her felt wrong, too still, too quiet. Even the gulls circled high above, refusing to land on her masts. By the 1880s, her reputation was so poisoned that no honest man wanted her command. She passed from hand to hand, each owner eager to rid himself of her cursed name. In 1884, she came under the control of a man named Captain Gilman Parker, who saw not a ghost ship but an opportunity. Deep in debt and desperate, Parker insured the Mary Celeste for a sum far greater than her worth. He filled her with a worthless cargo fish, cheap food, and everyday good. Zan set course for Haiti. What happened next was a final act of fraud and folly. Parker deliberately ran the Mary Celeste aground on the reefs off Ganavi Island, intending to claim insurance money and abandon the wreck. But the sea, it seemed, would not let her story end so simply. The scheme was discovered, and Parker was arrested for fraud. Within a year, he was dead, his reputation ruined, his life consumed by the same ghostly fate that had haunted every man who touched the ship. The Mary Celeste herself remained on those reefs, broken and sun-bleached, her hull slowly collapsing into the shallows. Fishermen claimed that even in her final decay, strange lights flickered aboard her at night, like phantom lanterns swinging in the wind. They said her wreck groaned as if calling out for her lost crew, her timbers sighing with the weight of all the unanswered questions still buried beneath the sea. As the decades rolled forward, the Mary Celeste's mystery refused to fade. In fact, it only grew larger, swollen by storytellers, historians, and charlatans alike. Every new generation seemed to invent a fresh explanation for her ghostly abandonment. Some said sequakes, those violent tremors that shake the ocean floor, had frightened the crew into thinking the ship would sink. Others spoke of waterspouts, towering columns of spinning vapor and sea, that could have drenched the deck and filled the sky with strange electrical discharges, making even a seasoned captain believe the heavens themselves were splitting open. Yet there were wilder ideas still, born from that place where science and superstition meet. A few claimed the crew had fallen victim to a giant squid, or some monstrous creature from the deep, a beast that rose without warning and dragged them, one by one, into the black water. Still others whispered of alien abduction long before the word UFO ever existed. These tales found eager listeners, for there was something about the Mary Celeste that drew people not toward answers but toward imagination. Even Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, could not resist her allure. In 1884, he published J. Habakkuk Jeffson's statement, a fictionalized account of the mystery that turned the Mary Celeste into the Marie Celeste, a name that would echo for centuries. His stories spoke of murder, curses, and racial revenge, but it also transformed the real incident into legend, ensuring that fact and fiction would forever be entwined. Over time, maritime historians tried to bring the tale back to logic-studying charts, comparing weather reports, examining cargo manifests, but no theory ever satisfied the public imagination. The ship's empty decks seemed to speak louder than any expert could. People wanted to believe the Mary Celeste was chosen by fate, that something ancient and unknowable had reached out from the deep to take her crew. And maybe, in a way, it had. For the sea is older than human memory, and every mystery it swallows becomes part of its voice. The Mary Celeste did not just vanish, became a symbol of that eternal divide between human reason and the ocean's unknowable heart. A riddle that endures precisely because it cannot be solved. Time, as always, became the sea's most faithful ally. As years turned into decades, the wreck of the Mary Celeste slowly disappeared beneath coral and tide. Her timbers scattered like bones across the shallow waters near Gonavie Island. The salt devoured her nameplate, barnacles buried her scars, and the wind carried away the last of her human touch. Yet the story refused to sink. The mystery clung to the surface like oil on calm water. It passed from sailor to sailor, tavern to tavern, whispered in ports from Nova Scotia to Gibraltar. Men who had never seen the Atlantic swore they'd felt her shadow in their dreams. In every retelling, she changed a little, the details shifting like waves against the hull. Some said she'd been seen again, drifting through fog with torn sails and ghostly figures pacing her deck. Others claimed to have spotted her in the distance, glowing faintly at night, her masts lit by a cold, blue light that no storm could extinguish. Superstition grew roots. Entire crews swore that to speak her name before a voyage was to invite disaster. Captains scolded their men for whispering it, yet they did it anyway, quietly, as if her curse were also her protection. The sea, they said, has a way of remembering what man forgets. The Mary Celeste became more than a shipwreck. It became a memory of loss itself, an emblem of the ocean's hunger. Every captain who looked out over a calm horizon knew that peace could turn to ruin in a heartbeat. Every deckhand who tied a line or lit a lamp wondered if he too might one day vanish into the same silence that had taken Captain Briggs and his people. And so, the story lived not as history, but as warning. For in the end, what truly haunts men is not the idea of death, but the idea of disappearance. To die is to end. To vanish is to become eternal. The Mary Celeste was not destroyed, and that made her worse than a tragedy. She was unfinished, a question that no one could bury, a ghost forever sailing through time, reminding those who dare to cross the Atlantic that the sea does not forget, and it does not forgive, to understand the deeper shadows surrounding the Mary Celeste. One must return to the man at her helm, Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs. He was not a reckless adventurer or desperate opportunist. He was a man of discipline and devotion, both to his ship and to his God. Friends described him as calm, honest, and deeply moral, the kind of captain sailors trusted with their lives. Before that final voyage, Briggs had considered leaving the sea altogether. He had spoken to his brother about settling into a quieter life, perhaps investing in business or working ashore. But when the opportunity arose to take command of a fine brigantine bound for Genoa, he accepted. It was meant to be a safe journey, a straightforward cargo run across the Atlantic. He even brought his wife, Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, along, leaving their son Arthur at home in Massachusetts. The image of that family stepping aboard the Mary Celeste in November 1872 has haunted historians for generations. Husband proud, a wife serene, a child too young to understand that she was sailing into legend. The captain's Bible was found open on his desk after the ship's discovery, as if left there Many have wondered what passage it was open to, though no one ever recorded it. Some say it might have been from Psalms, others from Revelation. Whatever it was, the symbolism lingers, a man of faith steering into the unknown, leaving behind an open page that no one could close. His journals were neat and precise, recording nothing unusual or fearful. His last entry spoke simply of the weather, the ship's position, the steady rhythm of the voyage. Then silence. No sign of mutiny, no sign of fear only, the lingering certainty that something interrupted an ordinary moment and erased everything that followed. Some who studied Briggs's writings claim they sense a quiet foreboding between the lines, an unease that words could not capture. Perhaps he felt something watching them in the stillness of those calm days before the storm of mystery broke. The captain's faith may have given him strength, but even faith cannot reason with the sea. The Atlantic has no mercy for good men. It takes without hatred, and in taking, it remembers in the days leading up to the disappearance. The Mary Celeste sailed beneath skies so bright and blue they seemed to promise eternity. The ocean was calm, the wind steady, the weather perfect for an Atlantic crossing. There were no storms recorded, no reports of violent squalls or heavy seas. Witnesses from ships passing nearby later described the same still waters, so smooth that the horizon blurred into the sky. It was as if the world itself had paused, holding its breath. The last log entry, written by Captain Briggs on November 25, 1872, described the ship's position 6 miles northeast of Santa Maria Island in the Azores. Everything was routine. The cargo was secure, the crew healthy, the voyage on schedule. No hint of fear, no sign of strain. Then nothing. When the Dei Gratia found her 9 days later, it was as if life had been peeled away in an instant. Not a struggle, not a sign of panic, just absence. Experts later suggested that perhaps it was this very calm that concealed the danger. The ocean's silence can be deceptive. Beneath glassy waters, gases could escape from volcanic fissures near the Azores, creating sudden turbulence. A violent release of gas could lift a ship without warning, tilting it, hissing through the hull like breath from the underworld. Or perhaps the crew saw something on the horizon, strange fog, a mirage, or distant smoke, believed they were in peril. It's possible the captain, cautious and protective of his family, ordered everyone into the lifeboat until they were sure. But the rope securing it might have snapped, setting them adrift. The lifeboat, light and fragile, would never have stood a chance against the Atlantic's shifting moods. The next wind or wave could have carried it into nothingness, leaving the ship to continue alone. The idea chills even seasoned sailors. How close safety and death can lie upon the same water. How quickly the sea can erase a decision, a mistake, a heartbeat, when the calm ocean turned to endless silence. The Mary Celeste was reborn as something else, not a vessel of trade, but a floating ghost, an empty witness to a moment of quiet catastrophe that no eye survived to see. The captain's logbook of the Mary Celeste, remains one of the most haunting artifacts in maritime history, not because of what it says, but because of how abruptly it stops. Each entry before the last was written in Captain Briggs's tidy, deliberate hand, recording wind direction, barometric pressure, and the ship's speed. The words are calm, unhurried, the writing of a man in command and at ease. Then the final note, dated November 25th, 1872, ends mid-thought, describing the ship's position near the Azores. No warning, no storm, no illness, just ordinary navigation. The log was found open in the cabin when the Dei Gratia crew boarded her, the ink dry, the page unmarked by panic. It was as if life had simply drifted away between one entry and the next. Investigators later noted that the captain's sextant and chronometer were missing tools essential for navigations, suggesting that whoever left the ship intended to return. That tiny clue sparked decades of debate. Why would they abandon a seaworthy vessel with food, water, and supplies intact? The lifeboat, the only means of escape, was gone. So was a single length of rope trailing from the stern, perhaps the line that once tied the two together. Imagine it, the captain, his wife, their child, and 7 sailors lowering themselves into the small craft, perhaps expecting to board again within minutes. The great ship rocks gently in the still air as they drift a few yards away, watching, waiting. Then a sudden gust. The rope snaps. The wind picks up, catching the brigantine's sails. The Mary Celeste begins to move, slow at first, then faster as the gap widens. The crew shouts, "Rows," but it's useless. The Atlantic is vast, and within moments the lifeboat is lost behind the rolling waves. That's the picture some maritime historians paint: a tragedy of misjudgment, not malice. But others see something deeper. They point to the quietness of the last log, the eerie precision of its final line, as if the pen itself hesitated before vanishing into silence. Perhaps the captain sensed something approaching, something he couldn't name. The ocean can feel wrong before it turns violent. The sea speaks in moods before it breaks in storms. Whatever that silence meant, it was the last human word ever written aboard the Mary Celeste. The names of those who vanished aboard the Mary Celeste are rarely spoken now, but once they were men of flesh, bone, and laughter. They were experienced sailors, each handpicked by Captain Briggs for their skill and temperament. There was first Mate Albert Richardson, a seasoned seaman who had sailed with Briggs before and was considered as dependable as the captain himself. Second Mate Andrew Gilling, a young but capable officer from New York. The steward, Edward Head, known for his sharp wit and punctuality. The seaman Volkert, Lorenzen, Arian Martins, Gottlieb, Goodshot, and brothers Bars and Volkert, disciplined men from Denmark and Germany who had seen enough of the sea to know its moods. These were not green sailors or superstitious drifters. They were professionals, trusted by their captain and proud of their craft. And yet, every one of them vanished without a trace. Not a scrap of clothing, not a single body, not even the faintest drift of wreckage from their missing lifeboat was ever found. The Atlantic swallowed them completely, as if the sea itself chose to erase them from memory. When the Dei Gratia crew boarded the ship, they found meals half prepared, clothes neatly folded, and even sewing projects unfinished, small, human traces of a life interrupted. The captain's cabin showed no signs of struggle. Sarah Briggs's sewing machine sat near a folded dress. The daughter's toys were in place, her cot still tidy. Everything suggested an orderly evacuation, but one that had no reason and no return. Investigators scoured shipping lanes for months afterward, hoping for reports of a drifting lifeboat or castaways. spotted on distant shores. Nothing. The lifeboat was as gone as the people who rowed it. Theories grew like vines around their absence. Mutiny. Pirates seek quakes. Explosion, but the human element remained the same. 10 souls vanished from a floating island of wood and iron under a clear blue sky. For centuries, the ocean has claimed ships, but rarely so gently. There was no violence here, no broken rigging, no torn sails. It was as if the sea had inhaled once and, with that single breath, taken them all. The Mary Celeste drifted on, crewless yet alive, carrying with her the silence of 10 voices that the world would never hear again. It was December 5th, 1872, when the Dei Gratia spotted her an unfamiliar brigantine drifting aimlessly about 400 miles east of the Azores. The sea was calm, the air sharp with salt, and the faint hum of wind against the sails. Captain Morehouse, commanding the Dei Gratia, peered through his spyglass and saw something uncanny. The ship ahead moved, but unnaturally sewed sails, tattered yet still full. Its course uncertain, as if guided by invisible hands. No signal flew from her masts. No figures moved on deck. Morehouse ordered his crew to approach cautiously. As they drew near, the name came into focus. Mary Celeste. The sight stirred unease, for Morehouse knew her captain Benjamin Briggs was a friend, a man of faith and integrity. The Mary Celeste should have been nearing Genoa by now, not wandering the mid-Atlantic like a soul untethered. Morehouse hailed her. No reply. Silence rolled across the water. After several attempts, he sent his first mate and a small boarding party across. As they climbed aboard, the sound changed the creak of ropes, the slap of waves against the hull, the hollow echo of footsteps on a ship without voices. Everything was still. The sails were partly set, but in disarray. The wheels spun freely, untended. Below deck, the cargo of alcohol barrels remained mostly intact. Food, water, and supplies, enough for months, were untouched. The captain's log lay on the desk, its last entry dated 10 days earlier. In the galley, a pot of food was found mid-preparation, the meal abandoned as if someone had simply stood up and walked away. The ship's clock had stopped. The sextant and chronometer were missing, along with the lifeboat. There were no signs of blood, violence, or struggle, only a deep, unnatural stillness that clung to every surface. The men from the Dei Gratia searched each cabin in silence, calling names that never answered. It was as though the Mary Celeste herself was holding her breath, unwilling to speak of what had happened. When they finally returned to their captain, their faces were pale, their eyes wide with disbelief. One sailor later said, the worst part wasn't the emptiness, was the feeling that the people were still there, unseen, watching from somewhere just beyond the veil of the sea. The men of the Dei Gratia lingered on the deck of the Mary Celeste, torn between fascination and fear. Every sound echoed unnaturally: the groan of the wooden beams, the faint flap of a torn sail, the whisper of wind sliding through the rigging like a sigh. The smell of salt and damp canvas mixed with something subtler: aged wood, stagnant air, and the faint trace of alcohol vapor seeping from the cargo hold. They moved cautiously, as though afraid to disturb whatever had taken place here. The ship was seaworthy, yet empty of life. Its wheel turned gently with the roll of the waves, as though an invisible hand still guided it. Inside the cabins, they found signs of routine life frozen mid-action. A sewing kit lay open beside half-mended clothes. The captain's Bible was left on a table, its pages fluttering softly in the breeze through a cracked window. A child's doll sat abandoned on a bunk, one glass eye staring out toward the corridor. In the mess hall, utensils were neatly arranged. A half-used candle dripped wax down to the table, long since extinguished. There was no blood, no damage, no sign of struggle, only this ghostly stillness that clung to everything like dust. The lifeboat's absence was the only clear clue, but even that deepened the riddle. Why abandon a perfectly safe ship? Why leave behind warm clothes, food, and all personal effects? Experienced sailors would never take to a small boat unless the mother ship was beyond saving. But Mary Celeste was solid, her hull unbreached, her cargo dry. The men from Dei Gratia felt an unseen weight pressing upon them, something heavy and unspoken. Some swore they heard faint knocks below deck, as though footsteps pacing somewhere they couldn't find. Others claimed to feel a presence just over their shoulder, gone the moment they turned. They took the wheel and began the long journey to Gibraltar, towing the Mary Celeste alongside. Night after night, her empty decks creaked and whispered. Across the waves, the sound like low murmurs, carried by wind. Morehouse kept watch from his own ship, often staring at the silhouette of the drifting brigantine in the moonlight. He later said it felt as if she were following him alive, conscious, but refusing to speak her secret. The ocean was calm, but the men knew they were escorting something far stranger than a mere vessel. They were towing a mystery, a ghost given shape in wood and canvas. The voyage to Gibraltar was long and unsettling, marked not by storms or tempests, but by a steady, oppressive quiet that unnerved even the most seasoned sailors. Captain Morehouse divided his crew, leaving 3 men aboard the Mary Celeste to steer her through the Atlantic swells, while the rest manned the Dei Gratia. The 2 ships moved in uneasy parallel, one alive with human presence, the other a drifting tomb of unanswered questions. By day, the Mary Celeste glided with an eerie grace, her patched sails glowing white beneath the sun. By night, she became a darker silhouette, her lanterns swaying in the mist, casting ghostly reflections on the black water. The men aboard her avoided the lower decks whenever possible. They claimed the air below carried a strange stillness, thick with the scent of damp paper and spilled spirits. Some said they heard voices distant and indistinct rising from the hold when the ship groaned. The logbook sat open on the table in the captain's cabin, untouched since the final entry of November 25th. The ink had dried to a faint brown. The coordinates placed the Mary Celeste hundreds of miles from where she now drifted, suggesting she had sailed alone, rudder held by nothing but the will of the sea. The men who slept aboard her did so lightly, waking often to the creak of wood or the faint clang of loose rigging. Even the wind seemed different on her deck, sharper, colder, carrying whispers that could not be traced. Captain Morehouse, writing in his own log, noted the unease spreading among his crew. He reminded them of the law of the sea. Salvage meant reward. But even gold could not drown the feeling that the Mary Celeste was wrong in some essential way, as if she resisted being found, as if the ocean itself had marked her. Days stretched into a week, the ships inching toward Gibraltar through steady winds. When at last the rock appeared on the horizon, the men breathed in relief, though none could shake the sense that something unseen had followed them all the way. As they guided the Mary Celeste into harbour on the morning of December 13th, the watching port officials saw 2 ships enter, but one seemed curiously empty, her sails stirring in the breeze as though moved by ghosts. And in that moment, the legend of the ghost ship of the Atlantic was born. When the Mary Celeste reached Gibraltar, the officials expected a straightforward salvage claim. Instead, they encountered a mystery so tangled that it turned every sailor's superstition into uneasy speculation. The harbour master, James Winchester, approached the ship with a mixture of curiosity and dread. From the dock, she looked ordinary, weathered but sound yet. As soon as he stepped aboard, a chill ran through him. The air was heavy, stale, as if it had been sealed inside for years rather than weeks. The Admiralty Court quickly ordered an inquiry, led by Frederick Sollyflood, the Attorney General for Gibraltar, a man known for suspicion bordering on paranoia. He examined every inch of the ship with obsessive precision. The cargo of industrial alcohol was mostly intact, though 9 barrels had leaked or been tampered with. To Sollyflood, that was no accident, it was motive. He theorized that Captain Briggs and his crew might have gotten drunk, mutinied, or fought over the cargo's value. Yet nothing in the evidence supported such chaos. The ship bore no signs of struggle, no blood, no broken furniture, and no damage consistent with a violent act. Everything was simply absent. Sollyflood then turned his suspicion toward the Dei Gratia and her captain. Perhaps, he suggested, Morehouse and his crew had murdered Briggs and his family to claim the Mary Celeste and her cargo as salvage. But again, the theory collapsed under scrutiny. The condition of the Mary Celeste, her careful sailing trim, her dry bilge, her secure hatches, made it clear she had been deliberately abandoned, not taken by force. The ship's log ended calmly, suggesting no panic, no storm, no mutiny. The crew's belongings remained neatly folded in their quarters. Even the captain's wife's piano stood untouched, a single piece of sheet music still resting on its stand. Every clue pointed not to crime, but to something far stranger, an act of disappearance executed with quiet intention. Sollyflood, frustrated, began to imagine conspiracies, insurance fraud, secret plots, or hidden enemies. But none could explain how an entire ship's company, including a woman and a 2-year-old child, had vanished from a seaworthy vessel without a trace of violence or distress. The court eventually ruled in favor of Morehouse, granting a reduced salvage award, as if even the law was hesitant to profit from a ship that had clearly crossed into myth. Yet the verdict solved nothing. The Mary Celeste remained what she had always been, a vessel returned from nowhere, carrying no bodies, no answers, and a silence so deep it seemed almost alive. In the months that followed the Gibraltar inquiry, newspapers and maritime circles became obsessed with the Mary Celeste. Everyone wanted to solve it. One of the earliest theories came from those who studied the ships. Cargo, 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol. 9 were found empty or leaking, their wooden staves warped by the chemical vapors. To some, this was the key. Perhaps, they said, the fumes had built up in the hold, odorless, invisible, but dangerously explosive. Captain Briggs, a cautious man, might have smelled something unusual or heard the faint hiss of gas escaping and feared an imminent explosion. In that moment, a terrible choice could have been made. He could have ordered everyone into the lifeboat, tethered it to the Mary Celeste with a rope, intending to wait until the danger passed. But the rope might have snapped, or the wind could have shifted, carrying the boat away from the ship before they realized what was happening. The image is haunting. The Mary Celeste drifting silently while her crew watched from the small boat, helpless as distance grew and the ocean claimed them. Some researchers recreated this theory centuries later and found that the alcohol fumes could indeed cause a low, concussive whoosh when ignited, terrifying, but not enough to burn the ship. It would sound like thunder trapped below deck, enough to convince anyone they were seconds from death. Others argue that Briggs was too experienced, too rational to abandon a sound ship without clearer evidence of danger. Still, it fits the pattern of human fear. the kind that grows not from what is seen, but from what might be. The theory has an eerie balance to it, logical enough to satisfy reason, yet tragic enough to satisfy the heart. And yet, even this answer leaves questions behind. Why were the lifeboats, oars, provisions, and navigation tools gone with such precision? Why were the ship's papers, except the log missing, as though someone planned to be gone longer than a brief precaution? If Briggs truly intended only a temporary evacuation, why take so much? The alcohol theory explains the panic, but not the preparation. It soothes the imagination, but it doesn't silence the mystery. The Atlantic is full of ships lost to storms and war, but few vanish through fear alone. The Mary Celeste defied even fear. She floated empty, silent, unbroken, like a survivor who refused to tell her story. Another theory rose quickly from the taverns and newspapers of London to the courts of Gibraltar: the mutiny theory. It was a story too perfect for the public to resist. According to this rumor, the crew of the Mary Celeste, led by the first mate, or perhaps the cook, had turned on Captain Briggs in a moment of greed or madness. They had seized the ship, murdered Briggs, his wife Sarah, and their daughter Sophia, and thrown their bodies into the sea before fleeing in the lifeboat. The tale carried the flavor of seafaring horror betrayal beneath the open sky, where the line between duty and desire could dissolve in a single night. But when investigators examined the evidence, it refused to bend to this narrative. The ship's interior showed no blood, no broken wood, no sign of a fight. Captain Briggs had been a man respected by his crew, even-tempered, deeply religious, not known for cruelty or harsh command. His men were hand-picked, experienced, reliable sailors with families of their own. There was no record of tension, no indication of revolt. The ship's supplies were intact, its cargo untouched, its rigging in order. If there had been a mutiny, why abandon a seaworthy ship for a small lifeboat with little chance of survival? Some tried to weave darker motives, suggesting the day Gratia's captain, David Morehouse, might have conspired with the mutineers to seize the Mary Celeste and share the reward. But again, the facts resisted. The two captains had been acquaintances, perhaps even friends, but there was no evidence of prior arrangement, no sign of pursuit or violence. Morehouse's log and the condition of the Mary Celeste both pointed to a simple rescue, not a staged discovery. Yet the mutiny theory endured because it fit a human truth. We crave explanations rooted in emotion, greed, jealousy, because they make chaos feel manageable. The idea of ghosts and vanished souls is harder to face. Still, the deeper the inquiry went, the less human the mystery felt. Every trace of ordinary sin, violence, theft, betrayal was missing. The Mary Celeste had been emptied not by men, but by something quieter, colder, and more deliberate. Theories of greed tried to anchor the story in reason, but the sea has never cared for reason. It swallows both truth and rumor with equal appetite, and the Mary Celeste remained adrift between the two, belonging to neither. As investigators dismissed mutiny, another explanation took hold among the fearful and the imaginative alike: piracy. The Atlantic in 1872 was not entirely safe from sea raiders, especially near the Azores, where lawless ships and desperate men sometimes preyed on merchant vessels. Perhaps, some speculated, the Mary Celeste had been intercepted by such marauders. They could have boarded her under false colors, demanded supplies or valuables, and then left her adrift after taking the crew captive or worse. The open sea was vast enough for such violence to vanish without witnesses. Yet when experts examined the ship, the theory began to collapse. The Mary Celeste's cargo, valued but difficult to sell, was untouched. The crew's personal belongings, clothing, instruments, and even money lay scattered but undisturbed. No cannons had fired, no grappling hooks scarred her rails, no bullet holes marked her hull. Pirates rarely leave without profit. Moreover, the log entries showed no sign of distress, no indication that another ship had been sighted or pursued them. The sails were partly set, the hatches secured, as if the crew had left with care rather than in terror. Still, the human imagination filled in the gaps. What if the pirates hadn't wanted money? What if they wanted people? Some whispered that the Mediterranean slave trade had not fully died, that secret routes still carried captives into North Africa or the Levant. A merchant ship like the Mary Celeste could have been easy prey, its crew forced into silence under foreign stars. Others suggested a darker, stranger idea, that the pirates themselves were victims, that they found the Mary Celeste drifting and boarded her, only to find something that drove them mad or forced them to abandon her too. The notion is absurd, yet it lingers because it feels like the kind of story the ocean would tell one, where cruelty meets something older and more indifferent. Investigators searched for records of missing vessels or strange sightings, but nothing matched. No ship boasted of a capture, no survivors emerged with tales of forced labor or violence. The Mary Celeste was a ghost ship, not because of what was found, but because of what wasn't. No struggle, no theft, no ransom, no trace of another human presence. If pirates had come, they had vanished just as completely as the crew. The Atlantic held its silence, and the world was left with only the sound of waves and the uneasy knowledge that men could disappear without leaving even a scream behind. Asterisk as time passed and human explanations began to thin. Attention turned to the forces of nature. Some scientists and sailors speculated that a sudden or violent sequaker type of underwater earthquake might have struck near the Azores. Such a tremor could easily jolt a ship without warning, creating terrifying sensations, the deck shuddering, the masts creaking, the ocean boiling beneath them. Captain Briggs, fearing the ship was sinking, or that the cargo's alcohol was about to ignite from a shock or chemical reaction, could have ordered an immediate evacuation. In the confusion, perhaps the lifeboat was launched hastily, a rope snapped, and the Mary Celeste drifted away, while the small boat, at the mercy of waves, capsized or was swallowed by the sea. The theory fits the eerie calm of the abandoned ship, the absence of panic or violence, but still, there was no evidence of a seaquake in that region, no reports from other vessels. Others expanded the natural explanation, suggesting a sudden waterspout or rogue wave might have terrified the crew. A towering spiral of sea and wind could have drenched the deck, making the ship seem doomed. Briggs, cautious and protective of his family, might have ordered everyone into the lifeboat until the danger passed. But again, the Mary Celeste was found perfectly seaworthy, her bilge dry, her cargo intact, her sails trimmed. Whatever force they feared had left no mark behind. Another variation of this theory claimed that methane hydrates, gas trapped beneath the seafloor, could have erupted, bubbling up to the surface and reducing the water's density. In such a moment, a ship could briefly lose buoyancy and appear to sink before returning to normal. The smell of gas or the strange turbulence could easily have led Briggs to think the ship was doomed. Yet, no such geological activity was ever recorded in that region. Each natural theory carries a haunting logic. Something sudden, invisible, and powerful enough to incite fear but not destruction. They satisfy the yearning for reason but fail to explain the near perfection of the Mary Celeste's condition. Every theory breaks upon that one impossible truth. The ship lived while her people did not. She bore no scars of disaster, no stains of chaos. It was as if nature had chosen only the living to erase, leaving behind the vessel as a monument to its quiet, selective cruelty. The ocean, indifferent and vast, had kept its secret with the precision of a God that does not explain itself. When reason failed, imagination took command. The newspapers and storytellers of the late 19th century began to weave the Mary Celeste into something more than a maritime mystery. It became a haunting. Some claimed the ship had been cursed from the moment it was built, that its previous owner had met ruin, or that it carried a sailor's dying curse within its timbers. Others whispered of ghostly lights seen at sea, of ships that vanished into fog and returned with no one aboard but the echo of footsteps on empty decks. The Mary Celeste became their emblem, the ghost ship of the Atlantic. Spiritualists in Europe and America, eager to connect every unsolved mystery to the unseen world, claimed that the crew had been taken not by storm or madness, but by something from beyond. Mediums held seances, declaring that Captain Briggs and his crew had been called away by a voice from the deep. Some even published alleged transcriptions of ghostly communications, where spirits spoke of a shining mist that rose from the sea and enveloped the ship. To many, it was entertainment, but for sailors, it struck a darker chord. The ocean had always been a place where faith and fear met, where logic faltered in the presence of vast, unknowable silence. Stories spread of phantom ships seen gliding silently across moonlit waters, their sails full but their decks empty. Some claimed to have seen the Mary Celeste herself, long after her rediscovery, sailing without crew, appearing in fog banks only to vanish when approached. The legend deepened when writers like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle turned the story into fiction, reimagining it as the Mary Celeste and filling it with elements of horror and revenge from beyond the grave. His story blurred fact and fantasy so completely that many readers believed it was a true account. Even skeptics could not dismiss the unease that clung to the name. The Mary Celeste seemed touched by something that defied ordinary time, a ship that refused to die, that drifted between the living and the lost. It became a symbol not only of mystery, but of the human need to explain what we cannot see, to make peace with the idea that sometimes the sea takes people not through violence, but through invitation. And perhaps, some said quietly, it takes them somewhere we were never meant to follow. After the Gibraltar inquiry ended, the Mary Celeste was repaired, refitted, and returned to service. But though her hull was sound, her name carried a shadow. Sailors whispered that she was cursed, that her decks still carried the whispers of those who vanished. Captains who took her helm did so with unease, and the men who worked her rigging avoided speaking her name at night. The first few voyages after her return were uneventful, but an unseen weight clung to her, a reputation that followed her into every port. By the late 1870s, her ownership changed hands several times, each captain finding her harder to profit from. Freight owners hesitated to book her. Sailors deserted before departure. The Mary Celeste seemed to bring misfortune wherever she went, cargoes spoiled. Winds died, and voyages dragged on endlessly. Some claimed to hear faint footsteps below deck when the ship lay quiet at night. Others swore the air aboard was colder than the sea around her. In 1885, she fell into the hands of a man named Gilman Parker, a desperate captain facing financial ruin. He decided to use her for a fraudulent insurance scheme, Loading her with a cargo of worthless goods disguised as valuable trade, Parker sailed the Mary Celeste toward Haiti. Once there, he deliberately ran her aground on a reef near Gonavie Island, intending to claim insurance money for her loss. But even in destruction, the ship refused to give him peace. The fraud was quickly uncovered, the insurance denied, and within months, those involved in the plot suffered grim fates. Parker fell ill and died within a year. His co-conspirators met similar misfortunes. The Mary Celeste, half sunk and rotting under the Caribbean sun, was left to decay, a final resting place as mysterious as her legend. Fishermen who passed the wreck claimed strange lights flickered around her at night, and that the sea near the reef stayed unnaturally calm, as if even the waves avoided disturbing her. With time, storms tore her apart, scattering her bones across the ocean floor. Yet her story refused to die. Each year, new sailors, new writers, and new dreamers resurrected her name. She became not a ship, but a symbol, a ghost that outlived its crew, its purpose, and even its own wreck. The Mary Celeste had begun as a merchant vessel, but by the end, she had transformed into something eternal, a riddle carved into the ocean itself, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to try and answer it. More than a century and a half has passed since the Mary Celeste was found drifting through the Atlantic. Her crew gone, her purpose erased. Yet even now, her story refuses to rest. Historians, divers, and dreamers still argue over what happened on that calm December day in 1872, when Captain Briggs and his family vanished into nothingness. Every new theory adds a piece to the puzzle, but never the final one. Some see the Mary Celeste as a cautionary tale about the sea's indifference, a reminder that even the most rational minds can be swallowed by forces beyond comprehension. Others view her as proof that history is not just facts, but feelings, that what we cannot explain, we must imagine, that mystery itself is part of what makes humanity restless and alive. The ship's name has become a synonym for the unsolved, invoked every time a plane disappears or a signal goes dark. Writers, filmmakers, and musicians have resurrected her story in countless forms, shaping her into a timeless ghost, sometimes tragic, sometimes cursed, always elusive. The deeper one looks, the more the Mary Celeste feels, less like an event and more like a mirror, reflecting the human desire to conquer mystery while secretly needing it to exist. If she had been explained, if her crew's bones had washed ashore, or their log told every truth, she might have faded into history. But because she didn't, she endures. Perhaps that is her final trick. The sea has always taken what it wants: ships, lives, legends, and left behind questions for the living to obsess over. The Mary Celeste's legacy is not in her loss, but in her survival. She defied time and decay, drifting through centuries of speculation, always returning to remind us that the ocean is not just water and wind, but memory and myth. In the archives of maritime history, her name sits apart not as tragedy, but as a threshold between reason and wonder. Some researchers still chase the truth through sonar scans and historical records, while others believe the answer no longer matters. The Mary Celeste is not meant to be solved. She is meant to be remembered. Somewhere beneath the Atlantic, where currents whisper and sunlight dies, her timbers have turned to dust, but her silence remains. And maybe that silence, vast and eternal, is the closest thing to an answer we will ever have.